Hey, everybody. There's waters there if you want them. Water in a box, man. Water in a box. We ready, Matthew? So we shall start. We're good now? Well, welcome, everybody. We're joined by people via live stream, so we welcome you. We are in our sanctuary at 529 Crawford Street. We've got a nice crowd here, but again, thanks for joining us. Unfortunately, if you're joining us live stream, I can't pass out to you a study guide, but for those that are here, take one. And you'll want to follow along here for a little bit. What we're doing is, and I'm very excited about this, I've been working on this since last spring, talking about the Ten Commandments, but through the way we have looked at the Bible for the last, what did we start this a year ago, November or something like that? So, no, almost 2 years. Almost 2 years we've been looking at the Word through a very supernatural lens, what's known, some people know as the Deuteronomy 32 worldview. Don't have time to backtrack and go through all that, but those that are here, you know, and many that are watching, you know. So now we're going to look at the Ten Commandments through that worldview. We've looked at the resurrection of the body. We've looked at repentance. We've looked at angels. We've looked at all kinds of things through that worldview. But we're going to look at the Ten Commandments. Now, my reason for doing this is, it's a base reason, I'll admit it. Probably more than almost a year ago, I began to see on Facebook, which I haven't frequented for 3 or 4 months now, and I'm whole and healthy. I'm just fine. It's amazing. I'm looking around for other modern habits that I can drop. So I may go back to horse and buggy here soon. But anyway, about that long ago on Facebook, I kept seeing all these catty, snarky comments about the Ten Commandments. And I realized that it was because there were some laws being considered, proposed, passed, ordinances, whatever, that would put the commandments up in public places. And there were people that were pushing back against that, which is perfectly within their right to do. But the comments that I saw that I would categorize as snarky, were very ill-informed, and the responses from people who were friends of the Ten Commandments weren't much better informed. And I got the definite impression that everybody could benefit by reading through the text, as we've said here, slowly. I'm an advocate of slow reading of the Bible. A lot of problems with the Bible, a lot of problems with any text come in with bad reading habits. And one of the worst reading habits, especially with the Bible, is to run and gun through it and imagine that you know what it says when you have no earthly clue because you went too fast. So I began to think some months ago that pretty much the whole world could benefit from a slow read of the Ten Commandments, partly because it's in the news right now. So anyway, I'm excited to say we're going to start that tonight. I'm not sure how we'll do it, but my original plan was to preach on it on Sunday morning and then talk about it on Tuesday evening. But here we're getting a jump, so I'm not sure how it's all going to spill out. But take that study guide, and we're going to look at it. We're going to start with a few working basics, okay? And for you that are watching online on our, we have made available to our messenger group, which goes out to our church, so not to everybody, we have made available this study guide. So you that are part of our church, you can pick it up there. But anyway, let's talk about a few working basics. Before we do that, JR, ask for God's blessing on what we do here. Now, I could be wrong, thank you. I could be wrong, but I sense that some of the pushback that people are giving against the Ten Commandments, the idea of the Ten Commandments, the idea of posting the Ten Commandments, the idea that there should be 10 commandments, the idea that the 10 commandments are anything remarkable, or the idea that the 10 commandments undergird a great deal of Western civilization, which they do. But I've got a feeling that a lot of the pushback against all of that is tied up in the word commandments. Commandments. Thou shalt. You must do this. And I think there, in our era anyway, there's just an almost automatic recoil from the whole idea, who you telling me what to do? The word commandments. Good news on that front, because that is not what the Bible calls them. That's what through tradition we have begun to call them. That's what some translators early on called them. But the word itself, the Hebrew word itself, for this list that we know as the Ten Commandments is the 10 words. The 10 words. I think there is a better title even than that, although that conveys a lot. You could also think of it as the 10 instructions. Now, not so far would we go as to say the 10 suggestions, but the 10 instructions from God about the optimal way to live human life. His opinion, the 10 words, the 10 instructions. A technical word, and it's the word I think we're going to use through this series, is the word decalogue. Decalogue. You see the word deca in there? Anybody know what that means? Deca? 10. That's the word for 10. And then log is word. So we're kind of back to the 10 words. But that's a nice official sounding title. So I think we're going to adopt that one and use it rather than 10 commandments. We'll just call it the Decalogue. Okay? In this series anyway. Interestingly enough, there are only 3 references in the Hebrew Scriptures in what we call the Old Testament. There are only 3 references to this list. Let's take a look. Somebody turn to Exodus 34:28. Somebody else look up Deuteronomy 4:13, and then also Deuteronomy 10:4. Chapter 10, verse 4. As soon as you flag one of those down, somebody read one for us. Which one do you have, sis? Okay, read it nice and loud. Okay, there's the 10 Commandments. What Bible version do you have? Just curious. Okay, the New King James. Anybody have anything different, and does it read differently? Same verse? Because many translations use that word that we just said rather than commandments, which is by tradition what we call it, but they use the word 10 words. Anybody have a Bible like that? A version like that? What's it say? NLT? Okay. New Living uses the same, but some use the word words. Okay? But this is one of the references, one of the only 3 references. Take a look in Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy 4 and Deuteronomy 10. Now, Deuteronomy, as you probably know, is an extended speech. It is Moses' swan song. He's permitted to look into the land, not permitted to go into the land. And this is his last will and testament. And he's recounting, basically, everything that they've gone through for the last 40 plus years. From the time of the deliverance from Egypt and the time when Yahweh defeated the gods of the nations and defaced them and delivered them, delivered the people after he defaced those gods, and all the way through, all of the miraculous things, the provision up to and including now their almost entrance into the land. So it's an extended speech. And for my money, you can tell it's an old man's speech, because there are about 3 places where you could say, okay, Moses, you got your point across. That's about enough. You know, like an old man that tells the same stories over and over again. There is a ring of authenticity here. But what does it say? It's a mention of the Decalogue, Deuteronomy 4:13. Who's got that? Go ahead.
He proclaimed his covenant, the 10 Commandments, which he commanded you to keep, and which he wrote on 2 stone tablets.
Okay. So here it is. We all know the story. We've seen Charlton Heston in the movie and all that, so we know all about the tablets and all that. That's the reference here, but it's one of only 3. There's one more. Moses will mention it in our chapter 10, verse 4. Who's got it? Go ahead. Okay. I bring it up and I show you these 3 references because they're the only 3, because we have, and in the discussion that people carry on for and against, you would think that it is a bigger deal in the Word than it is. Now, I'm not belittling it. I'm just saying it only gets 3 mentions. Okay? And there you've seen them all. Now, we're in a climate right now, currently, when people are talking about the 10 Commandments. I referenced that earlier. And many people are talking about them in a negative way, that they ought not be posted publicly for various reasons, and I really don't think we need to go into that. I prefer to stick to the text. But we're in that climate where there's much talk about them in a negative light. And people object to them. They object to the idea of there being commandments at all, but they especially object to the idea that we would advocate, or anybody would advocate, that these are good to live by, or good to talk about, or good to even look at. I don't even want them posted in my schools. I don't want them posted in my city hall or whatever. I don't even want to look at them. All right? But as I said, I have found that many people that have objections to them really don't know what they are, or why they are, or what's contained in them, or why. And they certainly don't have a very good grasp on why they came about, the time they came about. So what I'm saying is people are poorly informed. But that carries over to the other side too. There are a lot of defenders of the 10 Commandments that may not be able to quote more than 2 or 3. But they defend them, boy. And we got to live by them, and we got to have them up in our schools. And I'm not advocating on either side of that argument. I'm just saying that on both sides, by my lights, people are poorly informed about the whole thing. Now, I want to take an interesting sidelight. Let's take a look at the 10 Commandments. You'll find them in Exodus 20. There's another listing in Deuteronomy, but we're going to basically work from Exodus 20 as we look at this Decalogue. And I want to read through them very quickly. I want us to at least get a grasp of them real quick. And then I want to show you some secular 10 Commandments. And you'll see why in just a moment. But Exodus 20, this is not a commandment proper, but it sets it up. And we are going to look at this part tonight. Then God spoke all these words. That's the word I was telling you, that we translate commandments. That was translated that way in some of our versions in Deuteronomy 4 and other places. Then God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God. Now, you remember, but some people watching via live stream may not be aware, that every time you see the word L-O-R-D in all caps in your Hebrew scriptures, in what we call the Old Testament, that is actually inserted in place of what is in the text, the actual name of God, which at this point is unpronounceable. We do our best by saying Yahweh or Jehovah. But every time you see L-O-R-D, that is the personal name of God. Again, everybody in this room knows that. But here we've got it. Now, the reason for that is because there were multiple, what we would call gods. Hebrew word Elohim. It means divine beings. There were multiple Elohim, but no other Elohim is Yahweh. He is God Most High, and that's the overriding theme of what we call the Old Testament. So here he is. This is him personally. Oh, that God, all right? Which is your God to the people of Israel. I am the Lord, your God. He made that very clear in Deuteronomy 32 when the gods of the nations are allotted the nations. But he says in Deuteronomy 32, but Jacob, Israel, will be my inheritance. So by inheritance, by covenant, he is their God. Yahweh is their God. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. That is a rich phrase, usually overlooked. We're going to delve into it in a few minutes. But here's the list. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol. And I'm just going to do a short version. If you're following verse 5, you shall not worship them or serve them. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Verse 7. Verse 8, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Again, shortened version. 12, honor your father and your mother. 13, you shall not murder. 14, you shall not commit adultery. 15, you shall not steal. Verse 16, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. And verse 17, you shall not covet. And it goes on to list the things that are forbidden to covet. There's the 10. There's the Decalogue, okay? Now, I want you to just take a minute to listen to the way some secular people have approached it. In their problem with the Decalogue, with this list that we just read, the whole idea of there being one, the whole idea of it being binding on humans, the whole idea that it's just a way for believers to curry favor with God so that he will reward them, all of that, in all of their thinking about it, they have decided, some secular people, to come up with their own list, which is just as good in their imagination. Now, one of the list makers is a fellow by the name of Richard Dawkins. You may be familiar with that name. He's one of the leading, what they call the new atheists in the last 20 years. He wrote a book called The God Delusion, which was wildly popular and made him very well known and fairly wealthy as well. But in it, he includes his own 10 commandments because he's got problems with this 10 commandments. And I'm not going to read his whole list, but it contains things like, do not do to others what you would not want them to do to you. That's one commandment. Here's another of his commandments. Treat your fellow human beings, your fellow living things, and the world in general with love, honesty, faithfulness, and respect. Well, I got no problem with that. Here's another one. Do not overlook evil or shrink from administering justice, but always be ready to forgive wrongdoing freely admitted and honestly regretted. Anyway, I won't read all of Dawkins' list, but there you kind of get the flavor. He's invented his own 10 commandments and says, actually, they're better. Okay? Which is he's free to do that. Later on, he revised his list and said, there are a few I wish I could have included if I hadn't been bound to just 10. Here was one he wished he had included. Enjoy your own sex life so long as it damages nobody else, and leave others to enjoy theirs in private, whatever their inclinations, which are none of your business. That's one of his commandments, okay? So you kind of get a flavor there. Now, a few years ago, CNN conducted a contest. CNN, the news agency. It was a competition, really. And they wanted to come up with the best set of godless guidelines. That was kind of in their rules. And they dubbed them the 10 non-commandments. And so it was a competition, okay? And it attracted, I think, somewhere around 3,000 admissions, people that submitted their list of commandments, non-commandments, okay? And the motivation was $10,000 prize, okay, for the winner. So let me read you very quickly the winning non-commandments, 10. Be open, number one. Be open-minded. Be willing to alter your beliefs with new evidence. Number two, strive to understand what is most likely to be true, not to believe what you wish to be true. Number three, pardon me, the scientific method is the most reliable way of understanding the natural world. Number four, every person has the right to control their body. Number five, God is not necessary to be a good person or to live a full and meaningful life. Number six, be mindful of the consequences of all your actions. Recognize that you must take responsibility for them. Number seven, treat others as you would want them to treat you and can reasonably expect them to want to be treated. Think about their perspective. Number eight, we have the responsibility to consider others, including future generations. Number nine, there is no one right way to live. Number 10, leave the world a better place than you found it. There you go. I guess it's all good. Initially, when I saw that some time ago, I thought there was something a little odd about calling it non-commandments when they're every bit as commanding as the Bible when it says thou shalt not. But anyway, I think the reason they said non-commandments and gravitated to that was because we're living in an age where there seems to be an aversion to the whole idea of rules for life. Don't tell me what to do. Don't tell me how to live. I do what I please. I make my own rules. I can even make my own 10 commandments. So I think that was the idea for calling it a list of non-commandments. But again, it's a little inconsistent with what they actually produced. But anyway, I think that was probably their reason for that. There's an aversion to the whole idea of rules, which is kind of strange because actually guidelines can be very comforting. Guidelines can be freeing. Guidelines can be an assistance. Thinking of the novelist Kurt Vonnegut, somebody wrote to him once and said, how can I be a better writer? He said, start writing poetry and make sure it rhymes. Now, a lot of poetry doesn't rhyme, but he said, make sure it rhymes. And his reason he gave was no playing tennis without a net. In other words, these constrictions, these guidelines will help you to produce something better. It will make you better. So rules can be a very good thing, right? They can even be a comforting thing. And anybody that has ever tried to learn to surf or to ski or to engage in a combat sport or to learn to be an electrician, work with electricity, knows that if you attempt to do those things without instruction, even if you attempt to sing without instruction, it could be deadly, right? How many times have I heard people say, God gave me this song, and it was just excruciating. So anyway, guidelines can be good. Rules can be good. So we shouldn't shy away just because they're called that. One of them the winner, one of his commandments, I think it was the third one, the scientific method is the most reliable way of understanding the natural world. I hope that the winner who came up with that means how the natural world works. Again, the scientific method is the most reliable way for understanding the natural world. I hope what they were talking about was how the natural world works, because the scientific method tells us nothing about what the natural world means. It doesn't have any meaning attached to it, or how we should live within the natural world. And the scientific method doesn't help us a bit about the why we should live within this worthwhile place in the first place. So anyway, there's so much for the secular 10 Commandments. Take a look on your sheet. I want us to push in a little ahead past the current climate and tell you what my working assumption is with all this. This is me now. You can accept it, you can reject it, but you need to know this is kind of how I'm thinking about things. And it's this, that the Decalogue, the 10 words, to my way of thinking, it highlights a way of life that aligns with reality. We're going to touch on that a little bit another week and why it aligns with reality. And if I were writing reality, it would be with a capital R. But to me, the 10, the Decalogue, it's highlighting a life that aligns with reality. It's very real. And it also highlights a way that does not. Now, you're entirely free to, and people watching, and I hope some of the people that I contacted that posted snarky things about the commandments are watching. But you're entirely free to embrace that or not, to embrace the 10 Commandments or not. You're entirely free to do that. But we're going to take a deep dive into the 10 Commandments here, not a quick glance. I think a lot of people in discussions today are guilty of taking a quick glance or making assumptions that they know what the 10 Commandments are. And I think our deep dive is going to show us something entirely different. And the idea that I just put forward, that these 10 highlight a way of life that aligns with reality, I think you're going to find that hard to oppose. Stick with us and you'll see. Because far from being a dry legal document, 10 rules, you must follow these, although admittedly people have presented them that way, right? But far from being a dry legal code, I think when the Lord gave these, and he didn't intend for them to be simply a list of duties, and certainly not a burden to bear, although, again, people present them that way. And least of all, I think he did not present it as a way to pacify him. In other words, if I do these things, then I'm going to earn his favor. That's the way they've been presented by friend and foe alike. But far from that, I think we're going to find out that what these are is really more like a charter of freedom, because they do align with reality. I see them as a charter of freedom that should be celebrated. I don't see them as a list of duties. And as this study unfolds, maybe I'll persuade you to think that way too. I notice, and we'll look at it later, that when the commandments, if you want to think of them that way, are given, that there is no provision for enforcing them by law. That if you fail at this, you're going to go to court. There's no provision for that attached to these. They are not designed to make you look over your shoulder like, oh, I messed up and now God's going to get me. That's not their purpose. And there's no mention of anything like that connected with them. They're not to make you live in dread. That's not what they're for. But they are intended, I think, to make you look up and to make you look inward. That's what I really believe about these things, okay? So, let's see how God introduces himself with the 10 Commandments, okay? Somebody turn to Deuteronomy 4, 32 through 33. This is a completely unique experience. You're going to see laid out here in the relationship between Yahweh and his people, his inheritance, a very unique experience, and the 10 Commandments build on that. You couldn't have had the 10 Commandments without this experience. But what you're going to see here in Deuteronomy 4 is a terrifying, unparalleled scene. Somebody read it for us. Deuteronomy 4, 32 through 33. Who's got it? Go ahead.
Now search all of history from the time God created people on the earth until now, and search from one end of the heavens to the other. Has anything as great as this ever been seen or heard before? Has any nation ever heard the voice of God speaking from fire as you did and survived? Has any other God dared to take a nation for himself out of another?
No, keep going. That's good.
I'm sorry. Has any other God dared to take a nation for himself out of another nation by means of trials, miraculous signs and wonders, war, a strong hand, a powerful arm, a terrifying axe? Yet that is what the Lord your God did for you in Egypt right before your eyes.
He's referencing here the Egypt experience, the deliverance. We're going to see that the Ten Commandments starts with that. Again, slow reading tells you that. He's referencing that, but he's also referencing the time on the mountain when he appeared and he handed these commandments down, the Decalogue down. And he's saying that that experience is unparalleled among any other group of people in history. I mean, look at the phrases. Who? Whenever did this ever happen? That a God spoke to the people and all this cataclysm went with it and this law was handed down. When did this ever happen? So right from the very beginning, this whole idea of God giving these 10 words, it's unparalleled. And the way he did it, the terrifying way he did it. Again, Deuteronomy is the old man recounting the experience 40 years later. And it's still terrifying when they think about it. It still gives them the heebie-jeebies. That they stood at the base of that mountain and they heard the voice of God and he handed them this. It was no equivalent among any other people group. Okay? So very, very unique. Now, God will speak later, but from this point, from Exodus 20, he does it very selectively. We'll look at a couple times he does it in the life of Jesus. But when he spoke on that mountain and he delivered what we call the 10 Commandments, that was very rare. And he speaks again, but very selectively from this point on. This is extremely important in the life of God, in the life of the people, in the history of the world. Okay? Now, if you are not a believer, and somebody watching this may say, well, I don't believe the Bible, I don't believe there's a God, you still can't ignore in the text that it's unique and that it's unparalleled. Nothing like this happens in the whole history of the Bible. God doesn't speak a lot, but he certainly never speaks like this. Okay? And for those people that witnessed it, again, it was a terrifying, unparalleled experience. Now, that's how God introduced himself. Let's take a look at how he does it by title. Okay? Turn to Genesis 1:1. You probably don't even have to turn there in order to be able to know what is there. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, in this group, for the last almost 2 years, we've said that phrase, heaven and earth, what it means essentially, and it's mentioned many, many times, many more times than you would imagine in your Bible, both Old and New Testament, it is a guiding, governing phrase. It's a touchstone phrase that governs much of what unfolds in the Bible. What it means is, as in heaven, so on earth. It even works its way into the Lord's Prayer, as you probably know, on earth as in heaven. And here you get the first mention of it in the first verse. The word Genesis means beginnings. This is a book of beginnings. You get the beginnings of civilizations. You get the beginning of arts and crafts. You get the beginning of metallurgy. You get the beginning of architecture. You get the beginning of music. You get the beginning of agriculture. You get the beginning of cities. You get the beginning of families. You get the beginning of crime. You get the beginning of everything in Genesis. In Hebrew, it's called Bereshit. In Greek, it's Genesis, and so beginnings. And here at the very beginning of the beginning, it says, in the beginning. It starts with that word. That's why the Hebrews called it that. You get how it all started. In the beginning, God created heavens and the earth. You get this mention of heaven and earth. As in heaven, so on earth. A big part of what goes on in the scriptures is what God has in heaven, he wants duplicated on earth. That's part of his grand scheme. Paradise was lost, but paradise will be restored. Eden was lost, but Eden will be restored. You see at the beginning the tree of life, and God is actively creating new things. That goes on hiatus throughout the pages of Scripture. Tree of life only gets a mention once or twice until the very, very end of the book of Revelation, when new heavens, new earth, Eden restored, the tree shows up, he starts to create again. Okay? So this is a real important theme. As in heaven, so on earth. He's got a pattern there. He wants to duplicate it on earth. Okay? And so here you get it at the very beginning. Now, this is not just a good way or a preferred way, if you're filling out your study guide there. This is not just a preferred way or a good way to start a holy document. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. It's not just so much fluff, okay? And it's not just a good way to start a holy document. What's going on here? In the beginning, God Most High, El Elyon, the highest God, God Most High, the Most High God, distinguished from what? From all other gods. Again, we don't have time to go back into Psalm 82 that talks about this multiplicity of Elohim, divine beings. And while there are many Elohim, and God, Yahweh is an Elohim, no other Elohim is Yahweh. What this Genesis 1:1 is not just a good way to start a holy book, but it's a poke at all those rival gods. In the beginning, this God created the heavens and the earth. Not some pantheon of gods, not some lesser gods. In the ancient Near East, in every other system, many gods were needed to produce a cosmos, to produce creation. You had to have many other gods. That's why you had sun, moon, sun gods, moon gods, sea gods, thunder gods. Those were not just natural wonders. That's the way we think about the sun, or we think about the moon, or we think about thunder and lightning. They're natural wonders. To those people, they were spiritual, which means unbodied powers. And you needed all those powers to create a world, a cosmos, a universe. You had to have them all. And Paul will flesh that whole idea out when he talks about the powers. He picks up on that. And he picks up on it because he lives in an environment in the Second Temple period when they're talking, it's a rich time, when they're talking much about the principalities and the powers and all of that, these lesser gods. Anyway, Paul will pick up on all that. But in the ancient Near East, you had to have all these gods that aren't just natural wonders, they're spiritual powers, they're unembodied powers. You had to have them all to create this thing. But what does Genesis do? It undercuts all that. It says, in the beginning, this God. He did it all by himself. He didn't need any other gods. He didn't need the sun god. He didn't need the thunder god. And we don't have nearly enough time to go into the creation account, how over and over again, just like in the Exodus story with the gods of Egypt, the creation account is over and over again poking at the idea that all these other gods had something to do with it. No. He is God Most High. And he created this from his own mind, from his own heart, and with his words. That's what he did. So this Genesis 1:1, again, is not just a good way to start a Bible. This is a poke at those rival gods, those other Elohim. Because here's what's happening. In claiming the production of heaven and earth, which is everything, there ain't nothing else outside. That's the Hebrew word of saying pretty much everything. Heaven and earth, both realms. Remember, he's got a family in heaven. He wants it duplicated on earth. That's everything. There's nothing else outside of that. But in claiming that the production of heaven and earth is the work of this supreme God, this supreme Elohim, that Moses will learn is named Yahweh, the I am. In claiming that the whole production of the world, heaven and earth, it's the work of one supreme Elohim, the author of Genesis does something very tricky. He, she, they leave nothing for the other gods to do. Think about it. If this one did it all, there ain't nothing left for them to do. That's why I say it's a poke at these other rival gods, what became rival gods that you read about in the Old Testament, Baal and Moloch and Chemosh and so on. Okay? And that's exactly what we find in the Deuteronomy 32 worldview. There are other Elohim. Yahweh is an Elohim, but no other Elohim is Yahweh. He's the one that did this. Without their help, thank you very much. End of story. Okay? So there we get an introduction to God by title. Okay? By title. Let's see how God introduces himself by name. This is going to take us now to our 10 Commandments, our Decalogue, eventually our Exodus 20. Okay? Take a look in Exodus 3, 13 through 15. Because God is not satisfied to be known as El Elyon, the Creator, the chief Elohim. He wants to be known by another name, by a personal name, a covenant-keeping name. Moses asks him, who? And he gives it, I am. Again, we don't have time to get into all that, but it's his personal name. And you get the first case of it in Exodus 3, 13 through 15. Somebody read that for us.
Then Moses said to God, indeed, when I come to the children of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they say to me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? And God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, you shall say to the children of Israel, I am has sent me to you. Moreover, God said to Moses, thou shall say to the children of Israel, the Lord your God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and this is my memorial to all generations.
The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, their ancestral God. The one that had chosen them for his inheritance. Deuteronomy 32, I will choose Jacob for my inheritance. Jacob is Israel. And even before there's an Abraham, he chooses them. Abraham is Jacob's grandfather. He gets the whole shooting match started. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was known by different names. Sometimes they called him El Shaddai, God Almighty, the most mighty God, the most powerful God. Sometimes they called him by the name that Melchizedek, the priest of God and king of Salem, gave to Abraham when Abraham came back from the War of the Kings. And he stopped by and it says he paid tithes to Melchizedek, the priest of God and king of Salem. Salem means peace, king of peace. Salem was the earliest city on the site of what came to be known as Jerusalem. You've heard the word shalom, Salem, Salim. It's all the same thing. It means peace. He was the priest of God, God Most High, El Elyon, Melchizedek was, and he was also the king of peace. A lot of people say he's a Christ figure, or maybe he is the pre-incarnate Christ. I kind of lean that way. But the point is, he comes out, and in this interchange with Father Abraham, who up to now has just been calling him God. He doesn't know what to call him, God. Or maybe he calls him God Almighty, the powerful God. He gives him another. Melchizedek does. And Abraham uses it from then on. El Elyon, the Most High God. Other gods, that name means nothing if he's the only one. If he's the only Elohim, El Elyon, if he's the only El, the only Elohim, then that name doesn't mean anything. The fact is, there are other Elohim. Deuteronomy 32, Psalm 89, Psalm 82. This is the thing that sets people's hair on fire. But this is the worldview through which we're looking at the Bible. This is the way God set it up. But Melchizedek tells him, why don't you use this name, El Elyon? And Abraham does from that point on. And that's what they refer to him as until Moses, the passage that Caroline read. Okay? This is the first use. This is the first time we get the name. And it happens in the Sinai desert. Just Moses and Yahweh. I am that I am. If you wrote it in Hebrew, it would be, the English equivalent would be YHWH, okay? Which we do our best with Jehovah or Yahweh, we're not sure, okay? So just a little backtracking there so you understand what Moses is encountering there. He gets the name that they've never had before. And he's told to use the name. And you'll be known by my name. You'll be called by my name. But this is the first instance. Okay, so God introduces himself here by name. Take a look in Exodus 6, verses 2 through 8. He's going to introduce himself by name. This time it's in Egypt. Okay, when the ball gets rolling and the deliverance gets started. It's slow in coming. It comes in stages as he defeats the gods of the nations, but it's started now. 6, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Who can read that for us? Go ahead.
And God said to Moses, I am Yahweh, the Lord. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as El Shaddai, God Almighty, but I did not reveal my name, Yahweh, to them, and I reaffirmed my covenant with them under its terms. I promised to give them the land of Canaan where they were living as foreigners. You can be sure that I have heard the groans of the people of Israel, who are now slaves to the Egyptians, and I am well aware of my covenant with them. Therefore says to the people of Israel, I am the Lord, I will free you from your oppression, and will rescue you from your slavery in Egypt. I will redeem you with my powerful arm and great acts of judgment. I will claim you as my own people, and I will be your God. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God, who has freed you from your oppression in Egypt. I will bring you into the land I swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I will give it to you as your very own possession. I am the Lord.
Whew! I am Yahweh. That passage gives me the chills. That gives me the chills. But what we've got here is God is introducing himself, this time in Egypt, by that name. Okay? Not by title. He referenced one of his titles, El Shaddai, Almighty. But he says, my name. Okay? He's introducing himself by name. This time, first time in the Sinai desert, now in Egypt proper. Okay, now we're ready. Stage is set. Let's jump into the Decalogue. And there's a prologue, there's a lead-in to the commandments. It's in verses 1 and 2, Exodus 20. The listing that we read, I read a short version of it, is Exodus 20. Take a look. Then God spoke all these words. Elohim spoke all these words. The words, remember? The word commandment is a Johnny-come-lately phrase. Hebrew, it's words. He spoke all these words, saying, I am. There's the name. He said the name there, and then the Lord. I am the I am. Well, that's what Caroline read, right? I am that I am. I am the Lord your God. He's identifying himself how? By title? No, by name. I'm that God. I'm your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. That part that Leon read talked a great deal about deliverance from slavery and bondage and all that, and everything that they would escape. Okay? That is a very, and we're going to come back to that. And those two verses go a long way toward enlightening not only the friends of the Ten Commandments, but those that are critics. I'll show you how. Look at that phrase, your God. I am the Lord, your God. Okay? Second person singular, if you're a grammarian. Second person singular. What that means is that he is God to each individual. That word, second person singular, your, it means I am the God to each individual. I am your Lord. I am your Yahweh. Individually. But it's not confined to that. As well as the people as a whole. As it said in that other passage, the covenant people. Right? The people who struck an agreement with Yahweh. And remember how that agreement went down in Genesis 15. They had the sacrifice. There was a half of the animal here, a half of the animal there. Move to the next animal. Half an animal here, half cows and rams and lambs and birds, and half. And the way the ancient covenants worked is the two parties would walk between with some fire. And what that meant was, if you renege on this, or I renege on this, we don't keep the covenant, we don't keep our agreement that we're striking here, then what's happened to these animals will happen to the one who breaks it. But if you look at Genesis 15 carefully, only one party to the covenant walks between the carcasses. Abraham fell asleep, and God let him sleep. And only Yahweh walked between. That means that even if you default, I will pay the penalty. Isn't that cool? What you've got in Genesis 15 is a picture of the cross. We defaulted, but we didn't pay the penalty. That's the covenant that's referred to here. These are the covenant people. So when it says your God, it's talking about individuals, second person singular, but also it's talking about the people, the nation as a whole. And the people by extension that would become the people of God even through Christ as a whole. He becomes our God as well. We become covenant people. And even if we blow the covenant, he takes the punishment. Wow. That's the covenant that's talked about. A lot of people get the idea that the covenant is the Ten Commandments. And if I manage not to kill anybody, and I don't lie, and I don't sleep with my neighbor's wife, and I don't even want my neighbor's wife, if somehow I can manage to do all that and keep it together, then I'm keeping the covenant, and God will be nice to me, and he'll bless me, and he'll let me go to heaven. That's not it. It's weighted in our favor. Because the only one that went between the carcasses and the only one that went to the cross was one member of the agreement. We're pardoned. Okay? The Ten Commandments starts with that. And that's really important. The your God. Now, catch this. Okay? You just read it. But catch this. Slow reading. Okay? If anybody's watching and you're saying this is a bunch of hogwash, read slow. Catch this. The first two times that Yahweh uses the name, what's he doing? Exodus 3, Exodus 6. He's discussing plans for liberation. He's discussing the deliverance that will come in the future. I'm calling it, he's discussing plans for liberation when he uses his name in the Sinai desert. Okay? I am Yahweh, and I'm going to deliver. And then in Exodus 6, in that longer passage, I am Yahweh. He's in Egypt now, and I will deliver. I will liberate. So the first two times that we see the name used, of the three times that it's used, that he introduced himself with it, he's discussing plans for liberation. But get this. But with the introduction of the Ten Commandments that we just read here, and the your God and all that, what's he doing? He's looking back on liberation. He references the deliverance, the Exodus, how he got them out of slavery. He's recognizing it as an accomplished fact in history. Okay? I want you to look at one last verse, and then we're going to wrap it up. Somebody look up Hosea 13:4. Because while this theme gets lost on us and even on people that champion the Ten Commandments, what the covenant is, that Yahweh is a covenant-keeping God, that we are his and he is ours individually as a people, and that the covenant is weighted in our favor, all of that gets lost on us when we start talking about the Ten Commandments. But it was not lost on the people in those days. Some centuries later, Hosea 13:4. Somebody read that for us.
I have been the Lord your God ever since I brought you out of Egypt. You must acknowledge no God but me, for there is no other Savior.
People centuries later are recognizing that he's the liberator and that it's linked to his name. So last bullet point, he intends, and that's what the Ten Commandments are starting with. He intends to link his name with liberation. Now, very quickly, what that means is, just think about it. In this time when a lot of people are talking about the Ten Commandments, and a lot of people are talking about it and don't like them, and don't like people that like them, and a lot of people are talking about them and like them, or think they like them, and champion them, but they don't know what they're championing. What it means that he intentionally is linking his name with liberation is this. It undercuts the charge, the assumption, which is the criticism of the Decalogue and anybody who observe it. And here's how it undercuts that charge. You're not required to keep the Ten Commandments to please God. That's what these first two verses are saying. You're not required to keep what follows to win his favor or his acceptability. And you're not required to do the Ten Commandments faithfully, and you better not miss one so that you can get brownie points. So you can get a reward. Very often the charge is, people keep the Ten Commandments because they've got to placate God, they've got to earn brownie points, and if they do these things, then God will be happy with them. And people are doing these things, Ten Commandments, so that God will be nice to them, so that they'll get something from God, so that they will curry God's favor. It's kind of a crass idea. Now, do some believers do that? Yes. But that is not what this passage is saying. It undercuts that whole idea. Think about it. The book of Exodus has gone 19 chapters up to this point, with God asking them for nothing. But it's been deliverance after deliverance after deliverance, and provision after provision after provision, and mercy after mercy after mercy. He's not asked them for anything up to this point. 19 chapters if you want to measure it that way. But now, right before the Decalogue, right before the 10 words, whatever that is and whatever you think about it, we're reintroduced to God who he says is yours and who has freed you already. He's freed you already. You don't do the commandments, so he will set you free. Thinking in the way we think, so you will be saved. You don't do the commandments to earn his favor. And that's the God that we're being reintroduced to. He's freed you already before you've done anything. He's not asked them to do anything, but he's already set them free. They're not slaves anymore. They've been brought out before he's asked them to do anything, before he's already freed them from slavery. So if you keep the Decalogue, the words, it's after you're already on the receiving end of the reward, not before. You see how that works? It should be very obvious, even if you don't like the 10 Commandments, that it's not a list that I keep to curry God's favor. That's not what it is. If you just read it slowly, those first 2 verses, he introduces himself as the one who's already set you free. And because he set you free, then I'm motivated to change my behavior. See how that works? Not I change my behavior so he'll set me free. But that's the charge that many critics make against people that are in favor of the 10. Oh, you're just doing these things to curry God's favor. That's the exact opposite of what we're presented with here. He had already set them free. They're slaves no longer before he ever asked them to do anything. So what it all means is God's mercy provides a motivation for my behavior. And that's a blow to some Christians, and it's a blow to some non-Christians alike. Because it's all about his mercy. I just want to end with this, and we'll probably pick up here next week, because this to me is the most amazing thing about the 10 Commandments, the Decalogue, is that they're a reflection not of my character or my behavior choices, but they're a reflection of God. The 10 Commandments are a reflection of God. They're a reflection of God. They're his reality imprinted on the cosmos. The 10 Commandments are God's reality imprinted on creation. And we'll just have to leave it there and pick it up there next week. So it's another one of those, everybody thinks they know what it is, and friend and foe alike probably don't. And we get that from those first 2 verses. I've already set you free.
That again sets him apart from all the other gods. Because all the
No other
gods
God
had
was
to
like
be
that.
placated. They had to have offerings, and he sets us free without anything. And then we get all of that mercy.
Exactly. And people that see a disconnect between what Jesus does and what goes on in what we call the Old Testament, they're missing the point. There is no disconnect. Because the free grace that's offered because of the cross is the same free grace that we see offered in the first 2 verses of Exodus 20. It's not a case of do this and you'll get my favor. It's the exact opposite. It'd be nice if you do these things because I've set you free. You're not a slave. So, listen, we got to end there. We're ending right about on time. Thanks to everybody that's joined us online, but let's pray ourselves out of here. Father, thank you for your goodness, your mercy. Your word is incredible. It's rich, it's dense, it's fun. Lord, so maybe we gravitate to your word. And if there's anybody watching that you doubt the word, they or they don't have an experience in it, may they for themselves begin to slowly read it and see that you slowly but surely reveal yourself in it. In your name we pray. We thank you.